So what we're seeing from the 1st of January is a small increase in the average energy bill price cap. So what that means is people are paying a little bit more than they are at the moment. But what this really means is that since 2020-21, energy bills are still £700 higher than they were at that point. So this is the fifth winter now that people are facing high energy bills across the country, and that's obviously causing huge amounts of suffering. So we're seeing record levels of energy debt, around £5 billion of debt owed by households to their energy suppliers. The sad reality is that people aren't coping. 12.1 million households are struggling with the cost of their energy. 5 million households are in what we would call deep fuel poverty, so spending more than 20% of their income after housing costs on their energy bills. The worst case of fuel poverty is where you have a combination both of people who are unable to heat their homes to a standard, but also are living in damp conditions. And what we see there is increases in mould and damp in the homes. And because that either they simply can't be kept heated right, they're not insulated properly, they're not well ventilated, and so you have that sort of combination where people are living in frankly dangerous housing conditions, and that's why we've seen in recent years some really tragic cases of people actually dying, even young children dying because they're living in substandard accommodation in properties that are infested with mould and damp, and that's the kind of the really hard case scenarios that we're seeing. Not only can people suffer if they're living in cold, damp, mouldy conditions, or that they're simply unable to run vital medical equipment, but there is also kind of people who have got pre-existing health conditions, such as asthma or lung conditions, or even like heart conditions, which are made worse by living in cold, damp conditions. So it's quite difficult to sort of say here's a precise number of people who've died because of fuel poverty, because it actually affects lots of other conditions that people do have and sadly will die of. So one of the things that National Energy Action talks about, one of our members, is this sort of unsafe behaviours that people who are in fuel poverty start to exhibit. So this could be things like only heating one room of the house, essentially moving into one room of the house in order to stay warm as much as you can. People kind of thinking about kind of closing the windows and not having enough ventilation, and that in itself can cause problems. People self-rationing the amount of energy that they need, so not keeping their homes at a suitable temperature. One of the things that we urge the government to be doing is investing in energy efficiency programs. Now that will help improve the insulation, the ventilation of the buildings when it's done right, but also looking at kind of other ways of improving heating, so installing new, more modern, efficient heat pumps rather than old, inefficient boilers. So there's lots of things that people could be doing, but unfortunately a lot of those will take a lot of money, and that's something obviously that people don't have. So that's why we need the government to step in and provide some initial support for people to get them up and running. Britain is going to be unable to meet its gas heating needs using domestically produced gas from the North Sea within the next couple of years, and by 2050 will be almost entirely reliant on imports. Now what that means is that we're exposing ourselves yet again to volatile international wholesale markets, and that is obviously really bad for our energy security. So that's why we need to invest in renewables, in alternative heating mechanisms, so we can break that cycle of dependency on wholesale markets and on imports. But we also need to look at the ownership of the people who are profiting from the energy bills crisis. So our research shows that over £125 billion in profit has been made by just 27 energy firms over the last 5 years on their UK operations alone. When you think about the suffering that those profits are being built on the back of, it really sort of jars with the public because they can see the profiteering that's going on. The energy prices were rising before the war in Ukraine. There was a massive spike as a result of Putin's invasion of Ukraine, and that clearly did create an even greater crisis than we would have already seen. But clearly that has had an impact. and the fact that wholesale prices remain still volatile and are tied to international markets remains a problem and a concern, because we're still subject to those and we have very little energy security as long as we're tied to that. There is a whole bunch of different things that go into the energy bills, and one of the things is looking at the kind of the policy costs, as they're called. So some of those actually are really important because they help provide support for people who live in fuel poverty. So the Warm Home Discount Programme that helps provide support to people in fuel poverty, that is funded through these policy costs. Some of the measures that we've seen in terms of tackling energy efficiency and improving that's also funded through these costs. What we need to look at is the structural problems that go behind the high energy bills. So, for instance, things like the role of market traders and the role that they're playing in terms of boosting costs, the role of marginal pricing, so that means that even when we're using very little electricity generated by gas-fired power stations, they're still setting the price. It's not the cheaper renewables that are setting the price that we pay. Another one is the network and transmission firms, the people who own the pipes and the wires that transport the energy to our homes. These are virtual monopolies, essentially, but they're run by private firms who are making billions of pounds of profit a year. So again, we need to look at how those are run, and also at how the investment in the grid that is needed is paid for. The main thing the government needs to do is to get a grip on the whole energy system, to look at the bills, look at what goes into an energy bill, and then look at different ways of funding some of the vital infrastructure improvements that we're going to need to see happen.